The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at choi.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Concerns about a potential loss of representation and a new action plan have caused farmers to make their voices heard at the Regional District of Nanaimo Board so far this year. In January, a staff report presented the RDN Board with the option of consolidating a number of committees. One of them was the Agricultural Advisory Committee, or AAC, which is made up of members of the farming community and directors on the RDN Board. The potential loss of that committee caused a number of farmers to reach out and contact the RDN, and local farmer Ben Glassen advocated for the committee and spoke to issues impacting his community at a January RDN meeting. While a number of other committees were collapsed into the Committee of the Whole, the AAC was spared. Related to the AAC is an agricultural area plan developed in 2012. Many items from the plan haven't been put into practice 13 years later, and the RDN also adopted this year a new implementation plan to try to address that. This week, Ben Glassen once again spoke to the RDN Board about issues facing local farmers. I got in touch with him to find out why. An editor's note, Glassen is also a volunteer at CHLY, where he hosts a farming-themed program called The Tuning Fork. What's brought you out to RDN meetings twice so far this year?
Well, it's always good to represent the farmers. And so a couple months ago, we heard that the RDN board had directed staff to make recommendations on efficiencies in the committee structure. And so a staffer presented a report that suggested that a number of the committees were not mandatory. And one of those was the Agricultural Advisory Committee, the AAC, at the Regional District of Nanaimo. I have a lot of friends on that committee. And a lot of people in my community reached out in shock that it would be suggested that the AAC would be disbanded. Now, admittedly, it does seem like it was, just a staffer who just suggested that this, along with others, were the committees that are not necessary for the RDN to have. And they had a note saying that in most communities, the AAC is tasked with evaluating whether developments should be allowed to be built on farmland. And her comment was that that is not necessarily the case in Nanaimo, or the Regional District of Nanaimo. Now, the irony is that our Agricultural Advisory Committee, that is their only task. When an application goes to the Provincial Agricultural Land Commission, which manages the ALR, the Agricultural Land Reserve, the provincial ALC sends it back to the municipality for recommendations. And so the first step has been at the RDN to send any of those to the AAC, where it is discussed the merits of basically removing land out of the Agricultural Land Reserve to allow for development or non-farm use. So other communities use their AAC, their Agricultural Advisory Committee, in all sorts of different ways. But here, it's only been used for evaluating provincial agricultural land reserve, non-farm use, or change of use, or zoning changes. So with this outrage of, already the farm community feeling like it's not being used effectively, but then to consider disbanding it, right at the same time as the Ag Advisory Committee has made comments on a new agricultural implementation plan, which is an addition to the 2011-2012 agricultural area plan at the regional district. So my email box got flooded with 8 or 10 different people reaching out saying, have you seen this, that they're trying to get rid of the Agricultural Advisory Committee? And so I took it upon myself to write a speech and apply for a delegation and to show up at the RDN in my cowboy boots and my cowboy hat and speak on behalf of myself and all of my fellow farmer friends.
What are the major issues facing agriculture here on Vancouver Island?
Something that I brought up in both my delegations is the fact that across North America, in the next 20 years, 50% of farmland will change hands. Now, Vancouver Island is a retirement community. It's going to happen faster than that here on the island because we have an aging demographic of people who are not able to farm or who are retiring out of farming. And through industrial and commodity farming, they have sent all of their generational children, potential farmers, to the city to get professional careers and work in the city. Because in the industrial model of farming, it's always been get big or get out. And so there has only been room for one family to farm on a property. And that's where we need to see a shift. With industrial farming, the equipment, tractors are $1 million, barns are hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the real estate on Vancouver Island does not meet the value of the farming capable on those small farms. We consider a big farm here like 50 or 60 or 100 acres. In the prairies, a quarter section of land is 160 acres. People in farming communities think that we just have these little tiny dinky hobby farms. So we can be producing a lot of our food here on the island, and we should be producing a lot of our food here on the island. And we need to be producing a lot of our food here on the island because we are isolated from the mainland. And so as we saw during COVID, as we saw when there was the sinkhole in the news, our supply chains can be cut off very easily. Something that I've learned from the president of the Salt Spring Island Farmers Institute, and he's a policy guy, he's not a farmer himself, is the difference between food security and food sovereignty. So food security means that there is always food on the shelves of our grocery stores because the trucks keep coming. But food sovereignty is the only way that we will ever have true food security because food sovereignty is our ability to feed ourselves. And so that's why I hope that right now we produce maybe 5 or 10% of the food that's consumed on Vancouver Island. My hope is that we can increase that. My hope is that if right now our food security, our food is only about 3 days of fresh food available if there was if our supply chains were broken down. My hope is that we could produce not 5 or 10% of our food on the island, but like maybe 20 or 30% of our food on the island, because that increase might mean that in a disaster, we don't feed ourselves for 3 days, but maybe 6 or 8 days when we're in a challenging situation.
Some of those figures you mentioned, such as Vancouver Island having 3 days worth of a supply of food, or about 5 or 10% of the food we eat on Vancouver Island was produced on Vancouver Island. Those are things I've heard often from a number of sources. Where do those stats come from?
These facts, these statistics come from a number of different economic development groups across Vancouver Island. So one that's most commonly talked about is that the Capital Region Food and Agricultural Roundtable, they showed that in the 1950s, there was an estimate of 85% of our food was grown on the island. And by 2004, that was 5 or 10%. And in the 1950s, and before there was the implementation of pipe irrigation in the interior, Vancouver Island was a net exporter of food because we had the ideal fruit-bearing climate up until they were able to irrigate in industrial ways in the interior and in the Okanagan. And so there's this huge history of farming on Vancouver Island.
You mentioned in one of your delegations to the RDN this year that a number of what you called the best farms in the community are up for sale. Can you tell me what from your experience has been happening when farms are changing hands on the island?
When farms are changing hands on Vancouver Island, it's the one with the deepest pockets wins. And so when farmland, small what the rest of the farming world would consider small farms of 30, 50, 80 acres. I'm specifically referring to the 3 farms that I know of for sale right now. When they're selling for $2.5 million, how is a young farming family supposed to be able to afford it and the startup to start a business? How can you afford to start farming with a mortgage of $10,000 a month? It's hard enough for young people to be able to buy a home, much less a farm. And so that's why my niche, and more and more we are seeing young farmers leasing land. So I bought the smallest, tiniest little house we could afford, literally one of the cheapest houses on the market at the time when we bought our home in 2019. And I live by the hospital in town. And I lease about 8 properties in the Jinglepot and Brennan Lake area. And those 8 properties, I've put some numbers to it, and I believe that they were worth about $25 million. So I will never be able to afford the farmland that I farm on. And the string of properties that I've put together, it's only 100 or 150 acres. It's still less than that 160 acre quarter section that you might be able to find for sale in the prairies for $1 million.
How can local government, how can the regional district of Nanaimo contribute to solutions on those issues? What would you like to see them do?
What I would like to see them do is empower farmers, empower farming organizations, empower the Agricultural Advisory Committee to do the work, because we're already doing it. And so with this agricultural area plan that was created in 2011, 2012, we have not really seen much happen with it. Now, there's people in the community who are doing it. And so it's just a matter of the regional district supporting those people who are already doing it so that the goals can come true.
Are there any specific actions that you think it's important members of the general community know about that you feel could be taken with regards to agriculture on the island in the near term?
The 2 biggest things that you can do to support agriculture on Vancouver Island is, first of all, to choose and vote with your food dollar. Buy the local products at Country Grocer. Go to the farmer's market. On Wednesday night, we only had 500 people at the farmer's market at Bevan Park from 3 till 6 every single Wednesday all year long. So if they're representing families of 4 and our town is 100,000 people, that is not a good percentage of people shopping at our farmer's market. And that's where you'll find the local farmers. And the only way for our farmer's market to have more and better product and for us to encourage more farmers in town is for there to be demand. And so we need people to get to the farmer's market. The other thing is thinking about food waste. One of the most controversial topics right now is increasing the dollar value assigned for farm tax from $2,500 revenue to $10,000. Why would we be trying to force people to produce food? Why would we be trying to allow people to scam the system by sort of producing food just to get their farm tax credit if 50% of food in North America is wasted? If we appreciate and respect craft food more, and if we know the farmers who did the hard work, then we won't waste as much of that food, because we as the farmers bear the cost of that waste. That's 50% of our labor, 50% of the seeds, feeds, fertilizer, fuel for transportation, and the animals' lives. And so if we know our farmer, if we meet a farmer, if you have a family farmer, if you participate in our local food community, then you're interested in your food, you will waste less, and you get back to the roots of one of the most simple enjoyments of sitting down and having a good meal with your loved ones.
Ben Glassen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much. I do chores every day, and I'm happy to do them with friends. So I'm happy for anyone to join me and come for a walk on my farm in the Jinglepot neighborhood.
Local farmer Ben Glassen speaking about issues impacting island farmers that prompted him to address the board of the Regional District of Nanaimo this past week.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
The Regional District of Nanaimo has a new strategy to try and make more progress on its goals around agriculture. An agricultural area plan was adopted back in 2012. There are a number of items from that plan that have yet to be implemented. To that end, this year the RDN board has adopted a new implementation plan. It puts a high priority on updating the agricultural plan's website and supporting local agriculture organizations. Director Jessica Stanley is chair of the Agricultural Advisory Committee. She's also director for the area that includes Cedar and Yellow Point, and she has a small farm herself. I spoke with her about the plan and issues impacting local farmers. From your role as chair of the Agricultural Advisory Committee, what do you see as the most pressing issues in agriculture in our region right now?
That's a good question. One of the big things that we're all experiencing is the change in weather patterns and how that's, it's making farming harder. Not only are we having extreme weather events, but we're also having increasing drought. And those play a significant role in making farming harder. They also mean that, food is getting more expensive and we're all facing the impacts of that. So yeah, it's a broader, global phenomenon that's happening, but on the ground, if whether you're working in extreme heat, or you're working in a scenario where, either it's drought or even just trying to figure out, what's going to happen this year and how are these weather patterns different when you're trying to raise animals or grow crops, that can have a big impact. So, from an RDN perspective, how is it that we can, look to understand those patterns and from a land use perspective. So, one of the best ones, as I mentioned, was the water, is to look at how it is that we can understand the changes in water in our community, what's going on with the aquifers, and as well kind of explore even water collection options, or even water systems at more an extreme end. But those are all options that you could consider that would support, farming at a really basic level. Farmers need land and they need water. And those are the core structures for what needs to exist for them to be able to provide food.
In January at an RDN board meeting, there was a report presented by staff, and some of the options it presented involved condensing a number of different committees, including the Agricultural Advisory Committee, in the name of efficiency. And there was a significant response from within the agricultural community. What did you make of what went on in January?
Well, it was quite a surprise to see that the Agricultural Committee was recommended for, to be collapsed. I didn't like it. And where it came from was this, is that the board is looking for efficiencies to save money. And so we asked staff to, make some recommendations about, we have a number of meetings, how it is that we could perhaps reduce those meetings. I think there was a bit of a miscommunication. Largely, from what I understand, at least, board members were thinking of, kind of our own committees, not committees that, like the Agriculture Advisory Committee, that consist of at least partially of volunteers that provide expertise, but rather, committees where board members examine issues like our Transit Committee and our Parks Committee. So for some reason, staff in their analysis chose to include the Agriculture Advisory Committee in these recommendations. And, not only was that a surprise, I think, to many board members, myself included, but obviously the agriculture community was quite surprised and concerned as well. And so they did respond and express that concern and express their support for the Agriculture Advisory Committee. And I think the board very much heard that. So although many board members flat out said that they had never considered that the Agriculture Advisory Committee would be cut, that was not part of their thinking. When it came to that decision, they reaffirmed the choice to support the Agriculture Advisory Committee.
What does the Agricultural Advisory Committee do? If you had to explain why this is important to someone who isn't a member of the agricultural community, what would you say?
Well, what it does and why it's important is slightly different because what, a lot of what the committee spends time on, and this is important too, but a lot of what the committee spends time is providing local input into land applications that are going to ultimately be decided for the Agricultural Land Commission. So let's say somebody wants to has a large parcel that's in the ALR and they want to subdivide that into a number of smaller parcels so that they can sell or for whatever reason. So we would provide local context on that. Or if they wanted to build something that is perhaps inconsistent with the Agricultural Land Commission's regulations, again, we would go and look at that and say, yes, we think that is fine because we don't see that having an impact on farming from our local perspective. Or no, we oppose that because we think it will have a negative impact on farming. So that's often what the Agricultural Advisory Committee has spent a lot of its time on since being chair. I've always felt that this committee can play a larger role. We have a group of people who have a variety of perspectives about agriculture, whether it's, knowing of working within farmers markets to actual farming or the processing of food. So this is great expertise. And not only could they serve that experience, that information about, how RDN policies, potentially land use policies, could either support or impede agriculture. I think that's great importance. The committee recently, reviewed the plan and made recommendations for this implementation plan. And I think that's great. Let's talk about farmers and what they think about the recommendations in the plan and do they think that will work for them? And some good insights came out from that. But there's other factors that are really important that I see this committee could potentially play a larger role in the RDN. We want to talk about emergency management. If we have a wildfire in the community, what kind of plan do we have to evacuate the agricultural community? Can we get the animals out in time? And so, who's going to be able to tell you about, farmer experiences than farmers themselves on that. If we talk about water and, water use, we have our drinking water and water protection program, great program, but do they understand water use and implications for water from a farmer's perspective? So I would like to see a broadened role for the Agriculture Advisory Committee. I think that we have lovely, informed volunteers on this committee who can be a really great resource.
Does this moment of this committee it was an option, as a few people said at the January meeting that was presented, of just getting rid of it? Does the groundswell of support that came in response to that option provide an opportunity to maybe enhance the scope of what it does, or to integrate it more with other work going on at the RDN? Do you think that's a thing that could or should happen?
Yeah, I think increased awareness, although it was, uncomfortable, it was a great thing, right? Sometimes when you are threatened with losing something, you realize or come to a greater appreciation of the value of that thing. So I think that ultimately, there were some positive effects of that uncomfortable situation. As well, not only did it increase awareness among board members, I think it increased awareness of staff that the community feels that this is important and that agriculture is important in this region. As well, what we're seeing in the RDN, at least from my perception, is that there is, kind of a resurgence. There's greater activity, a little bit more organization going on, it feels like, which is great. And so, all these things happening at the same time can be a great opportunity. We have a greater degree of engagement in the agricultural world, in this region at least. They want to work with the regional government in ways that we can look at to support increasing supports for agriculture in our community. We're looking at the regions to the north of us and the regions to the south of us, and they are more engaged, it appears, and have more established working relationships with their regional, not with their regional governments, but a greater degree of relationships and partnerships. It seems, for some reason, they've been able to achieve some really great initiatives. So I feel like in this region, there are people who have become motivated or were motivated or just doing more. I'm not sure, but there is a bit of a groundswell of activity, and I think that's a great opportunity for us to kind of find out ways of working together that's going to be more efficient in achieving outcomes.
What are the ways that three groups, the RDN, local government, the people working in agriculture themselves, and the people who are just regular stakeholders who aren't a member of either the agricultural community or the RDN board, what are the ways that each of those groups could actively promote our food security and sovereignty here on Vancouver Island?
Yeah. Well, I think recognizing the need for it. I think, back to that being lulled into a sense of security. I mean, you go back to the statistics. If we only have 3 days worth of food in case of emergency, that's something to, really deeply think about. The relationships among all those are ultimately understanding the value of locally grown food and the impact that it has when we support that. So, it's great, locally grown food. I mean, I can tell you from a farmer's perspective, I have great food, right? Because I produce it, and the quality of locally grown food is fabulous. So, having good quality food, if we can increase production here, potentially we can decrease cost. That's a big piece. So we want good, healthy local food at a lower cost. That's the ideal. As well, if we're not transporting food from Mexico or from, even, Brazil or China or wherever in the world, if we decrease those transportation aspects, that's a lower cost, but there's also a lower GHG emission. So that's a bonus. That's great as well. What does the community do? Well, you buy local food, and you consider where your food comes from. And yeah, maybe it might appear expensive if you go to the farmer's market, but it's, farmers are working really hard and they don't make money. They don't make a lot of money. It's not something that you do to get rich. So, you got to consider, how was this food grown? And is this food, and the outcome of that product, something that you want to support? And I hope that people do want to support local food and local, whether that's produce or other food products. How do we all work together? Well, we need the financial support. The government, from an RDN perspective, can, look at ways, and that's what this plan is, look at ways that what we can do in our jurisdiction to support that. Sometimes that's just information, right? Providing a source of information for the community.
Has the government been doing that? So this plan, this agricultural area plan from 2012, there's new updates to the implementation plan. A big part of that is updating and addressing the website. If you go and look at the website on the plan right now, it talks about this 3-year phase from 2014 to 2016.
Yeah. When I'm not, I've said it before, I'm excited that we're engaging. And it's been a long time. The fact that we have a plan that's, from 2012, I would have preferred to have a new plan. But what we're doing is, and I say this with love of lemons, but we're squeezing more juice out of the lemon, and finding what it else is in this plan that's worthwhile to do. And I am happy with the outcome. We do have some good things. Whether we do it or not, that's another question, right? Just because it's in a plan doesn't mean that it's going to occur. And this plan, unfortunately, is testament to that, because the vast majority of this is not new. Whether we do this, is related to a number of factors. But if back to that point that you were saying, like, if the community lets us know that this is how they support the RDN spending their time and resources doing this work, if this is a priority for the community and they communicate that to the board, then it's more likely to happen, right? With anything with government, right? I mean, we want to know what the community wants for us to do. And so if the community tells us, yeah, we want this, then it's more likely to happen. I think that's probably one of the best answers. Some pieces are happening already because of the challenges that we're facing. Drought is one of the big ones, right? So we're already looking at water in our region, the stability of water, the availability of water, and in trying to ensure that we have enough water to support not only whatever population growth occurs, but we can it's not super easy, but if we expand that slightly to ensure that we've got water for agricultural purposes, I think that's something that's quite doable and important.
Is there anything we haven't talked about so far today that you think it's important to bring to a conversation on this?
Support your local farmers. I think you've already said that. Here's one more piece, right? We talk a lot about a circular economy. And one of the items that came up through this process was whether or not farmers wanted compost or not. And originally, although that was identified as an item, it had been deemed that farmers didn't want that. Turns out that's not quite right. The reality is this farmers absolutely would like a source of good quality compost to use in our land. But the reality is that the compost that comes out of our region isn't good enough quality, because of what people put in their food waste. So that's another way that we can all work together. Circular economy, right? So think about what's going into your food waste containers. Those little stickers on your food, they need to come off. We also need to not put in things that actually are not biodegradable. And so there's lots of talk about those compost bags and whether or not they're actually biodegradable. So, I think that's one of those little pieces of information that, in what we do in our houses and in our businesses, and when we put what we put in our bins, if we could be a little bit more cautious about what goes into our bins, then we're going to get better quality compost, and we're going to be more likely to use that in the community.
Director Stanley, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Happy to, and thank you for showing an interest in agriculture.
Jessica Stanley is chair of the RDN's Agricultural Advisory Committee. She's also the director for Elector Area A, which includes Cedar and Yellow Point. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew, our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band, Waste Management. Get in touch at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.